Was it?
I don't know.
Probably the cleaners.
I'll have to know what the cleaners. I know them personally. I'll review the can.
Whoever it was, he cleaned it up.
It would be the cleaners. Clean it up.
Yeah.
Carolyn needs
Let
one.
me get you one, Carolyn.
Large print, Carolyn? Yeah.
As a heads up for the men, next Sunday is Valentine's Day.
Oh,
Just letting y'all remember, I got your backs.
you don't have to worry about that.
I'm taking her to Cincinnati to see her son.
Oh,
So
what a great deal.
that's Missy's gift.
Hey,
Thanks,
you gotta
overachiever.
take her to Cheesecake Factory.
Alrighty, if we're ready, I'll go ahead and get started on this. Today's lesson is for February 7th, 2021. It's lesson 10 out of the book. Joseph is protected in Egypt. The text is from Genesis 39:40. The focus is Genesis 39, verses 1 through 4, 7 through 12, and 19 through 23. Key verse is Genesis 39, verse 2. And the Lord was with Joseph, and he was a prosperous man, and he was in the house of his master, the Egyptian. The application is the student will conclude that he should be faithful to the truth even while he is being mistreated. A first look. Joseph's brothers treated him shamefully. One great lesson here is that we do not have any control over how others regard us. Joseph had a choice. He could allow bad treatment by his brothers to make him bitter and hateful, or he could have forgive his enemies, as Jesus later taught, and find peace in his heart and a better understanding of the plan of God for his life. The life of Joseph is a picture of the conditions of a believer in Jesus. Those who know Jesus as Savior are living in a perishing world. We are citizens of another country. Eventually, we are going home. It will encourage God's children to always remember that no matter what trials we face on earth, we do not belong here. This world is not our home. The children of God have a home, and it is the place Jesus is preparing for us in his coming kingdom. Joseph was 17 when he was sold into slavery. He was 110 years old when he died, and he spent almost all of his life in Egypt. Very importantly, in all those years, Joseph never became an Egyptian. In spite of the temptations of prosperity and the trials of poverty and imprisonment, Joseph remained a Hebrew and an Israelite. His body was in Egypt, but his heart was with his family back home in Canaan. If we keep heaven in our hearts, we can face our trials and endure our hardships, knowing that they are temporary, and also knowing that they are working for us in an eternal weight of glory. That was the remarkable spirit of Joseph.
I always remember that Egypt is a type of the world. So, we're in the world. The Bible says we're in the world, but we're not of the world. And, Joseph was down in Egypt, like it said, most of his life. So he was there 93 years of his life. He lived to be 110. And he still kept his focus on the fact that he was not an Egyptian. He lived in Egypt. He worked in Egypt. His family was in Egypt, but his home was the promised land in Canaan. That's the same thing with us. We're here on this earth, but this is not our home. Heaven is our eternal home. We live here, we work here, but this is not our home. And Joseph kept that focus throughout his life.
He was a good ambassador, wasn't
Mm-hmm.
All right, anything else before I continue? All right, before I start into this, I have a question about one of the names here. Is it Potiphar? Is that how you say that?
Potiphar.
Okay, I thought so. All right, a closer look. Joseph's success. Genesis 39, 1 through 4. And Joseph was brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him of the hand of the Ishmaelites, which had brought him down thither. And the Lord was with Joseph, and he was a prosperous man, and he was in the house of his master the Egyptian. And his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord made all that he did to prosper in his hand. And Joseph found grace in his sight, and he served him, and he made him overseer over his house, and all that he had he put in his hands. No matter what happens to us, God cares for us, and he is in charge of everything that happens to us. Every child of God should be spiritually refreshed by the simple truth that we are never alone. It would have been easy for Joseph to think of himself as alone and forsaken. His family had thought to kill him, but then sold him as a slave. The Ishmaelites had asked no question and bought him, thinking only about making money by selling him to the Egyptians. There are many people who have become bitter and resentful by much smaller troubles. Why did Joseph not hate his brothers, the Ishmaelites, or his Egyptian masters? He did not, because he knew that the Lord was with him. That made all the difference for Joseph. Joseph knew that he was not alone and not forsaken. He was confident of the presence of God in his life. Through faith, Joseph could face his trials and overcome every one of them. God made Joseph a prosperous man in Egypt. This word suggests that Joseph was successful in what he attempted, not necessarily that he had great wealth. Joseph knew how to make things work, and he used that talent wherever he was. Note that this was not some natural ability Joseph had. Joseph was successful because God was with him. God always works on all sides of every situation. Before Joseph went to find his brother, God had already prepared an Egyptian named Potiphar who would need a household servant. God then led Potiphar to the Ishmaelites, who had just acquired a young man from Canaan. Potiphar bought Joseph and soon recognized Joseph's ability and made this young Hebrew overseer of his household. Potiphar was moved not only by the success of Joseph in his management skills, but also by the knowledge that God was with this young man. Evidently, Joseph made no secret of the fact that his abilities were the result of the presence of God in his life. This must have been a strange message to the idolatrous Egyptians. At this time, the Egyptians had over 2,000 idol gods, including Pharaoh himself. In addition, these people were extremely superstitious. Out of this religious chaos, Joseph openly gave credit for this success to the one true God of Israel. This is a great testimony to the faith of this young man. Potiphar may not have believed in God, but he did notice the prosperity, that Joseph attributed to God. We do not know the size of Potiphar's household, but we do know that Joseph was in charge. There were many varied life situations for a slave. Many slaves were horribly mistreated and lived awful lives of misery and squalor. What does that mean?
Swallow is poor.
Yeah.
Okay.
Swallow is poor.
I would have looked up beforehand, but I guess I missed that word or something. This was not Joseph's situation in Potiphar's household. A fascinating principle taught here and stated in Luke 22:24 through 30 is that God asked us to be servants before he allowed us to be rulers. God was preparing Joseph for great things in his future, but matters were about to get worse for him. Anything to add?
think that's a good statement at the very end there. God asks us to be servants before He wants us to be rulers. There's a training process.
Yeah, I was going to go ahead and read that real quick. I forgot to mark it, but I had it marked in the book here that I was going to look it up. All right. Luke 22, verses 24 through 30. And there was also a strife among them, which of them should be accounted the greatest. And he said unto them, the kings of the Gentiles exercise lordship over them, and they that exercise authority upon them are called benefactors. But ye shall not be so, but he that is greatest among you, let him be as the younger, and he that is chief as he that doth serve. For whether is greater he that sitteth at meat, or he that serveth? Is not he that serveth at meat, but I am among you as he that serveth. Ye are they which have continued with me in my temptations, and I appoint unto you a kingdom as my Father hath appointed unto me, that ye may eat and drink at my table in my kingdom, and sit on thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel. All right. Anything to add before we go on to the next section? All righty. Joseph's temptations, Genesis 39, verses 7 through 12. And it came to pass after these things that his master's wife cast her eyes upon Joseph, and she said, lie with me. But he refused, and said unto his master's wife, behold, my master wotteth not what is with me in the house, and he hath committed all the things he hath to my hand. There is none greater in this house than I, neither hath he kept back anything from me but thee, because thou art his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? And it came to pass, as she spake to Joseph day by day, that he hearkened not unto her to lie by her, or to be with her. And it came to pass about this time that Joseph went into the house to do his business, and there was none of the men of the house there within. And she caught him by his garment, saying, lie with me. And he left his garments in her hand, and fled, and got him out. Jesus taught in Matthew chapter 5, verse 28, that a man who looks lustfully upon a woman has already committed adultery in his heart. We see this passage that the same thing applies equally to women. Potiphar's wife saw that Joseph was a handsome young man, and she did not mince words about what she wanted. She brazenly said, lie with me, in Genesis chapter 39, verse 7. Keep in mind that the relationship between Joseph and Potiphar's wife, she was the mistress of the house, and he was a slave. A slave could not disobey the request of his master. Potiphar's wife did not expect Joseph to object in the least to her command. In her mind, he was supposed to obey her no matter what. No doubt this was not the first time the adulterous woman had lusted after a servant. This kind of conduct was common in adulterous Egypt, and it is likely that she saw this as a moment's pleasure to which she was entitled. To his credit, Joseph refused this request. While many young men might dream of having such an opportunity, Joseph knew that this was a wicked act, and he refused. At first, he tried to reason with Potiphar's wife. He correctly reminded her that he had been given complete control of all that was in the house. Potiphar had trusted Joseph, and it would be a violation of that trust for Joseph to commit adultery with his master's wife. Joseph then added that this was an act of great wickedness, and that it was a sin against God. If the women had any immorality at all, she would have seen that Joseph was right. Sadly, we often desire most what we cannot have. This was true for Miss Potiphar. Day after day, her lust for Joseph grew. Every day she tried to entice him into an adulterous affair. Day by day, Joseph stepped carefully around this dangerous situation. He did his best to ignore her. There is a great temptation to have what is forbidden to us, and there is an even greater temptation to strike out when we feel we have been ignored. Miss Potiphar felt both these deceitful emotions. She waited carefully for a time when she and Joseph were alone in the house. She physically attacked Joseph, catching him by his clothing and trying to force him to lie with her. She made it easy for Joseph to yield to her advances. The house was empty, the bed was ready, and she had him in her arms. Here was the ultimate test, and Joseph passed. He wiggled out of his clothing and ran out of the house. There are times when running away is a sign of cowardice, but there are also times when it is a sign of great courage. As Paul wrote in 2 Timothy 2:22, it is always wise to flee youthful lust. The lust in the heart of this evil woman quickly turned to hatred. For her, this was a game, and now she knew that she could not win. So she kept the garments in her hand and called out an alarm to the other men of the house. She accused Joseph of attacking her, using garments as proof. She kept the garments in her hand until Potiphar came home and repeated the story for him. Potiphar was angry, and he had Joseph put in prison. Anything to add?
It wasn't just one. I go back there day by day. You know, it was an everyday thing. She kept after him, kept after him, kept after him. So it had to be some sort of temptation to him, but he kept turning her away, and no doubt that made her angry.
Nowadays, you don't have to go day by day.
Yeah. And she even planned, so that it would just be him and her in the house. She waited until that opportunity too.
It's something that really comes up now is, a lot of people just have to watch where they are, who they're around, because it don't take much to be accused of something and ruin your testimony, even though it might not be true. Like for Joseph, this wasn't true about him, but it took no time for that to mess everything up for him. So a lot of people just have to watch and be careful who they're around and what they're doing, even what other people might say. Like, I know Tracy, she'll be hanging out with my brother sometime, and I don't think my brother would ever do anything, but if they go somewhere, I kind of worry if someone would see them. It's like, well, what's she running around with him for? And that's, you shouldn't think about that. It's my brother, it wouldn't be a problem. But there's people out there that would make statements like that, and it could ruin our testimony. And you got to watch who you're around sometimes, and that's bad. It's like that, but you got to. So, all right, I'll go ahead and continue. Joseph's unfair treatment, Genesis 39, verses 19 through 23. And it came to pass, when his master heard the words of his wife, which he spake unto him, saying, After this manner did thy servant to me, that his wrath was kindled. And Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison, a place where the king's prisoners were bound, and he was in the prison. But the Lord was with Joseph, and showed him mercy, and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners that were in the prison, and whatsoever they did there, he was the doer of it. The keeper of the prison looked not to anything that was under his hand, because the Lord was with him, and that which he did, the Lord made it to prosper. In a few hours, Joseph had gone from a good situation to a horrible one. He had been in charge of Potiphar's household, and now he was in prison, apparently for life. However, the Lord was still with Joseph. God had a greater household in mind than that of Potiphar for Joseph to rule. While he was in prison, the guards noticed Joseph's abilities. They realized that he could be helpful to them, and before long, Joseph was in charge of the other prisoners. Do not overlook that Joseph rose to prominence wherever he was. He did not have a bitter or resentful spirit. Instead, he just used his God-given abilities wherever he was. He was as successful in prison as he had been in Potiphar's house. While he was in prison, Joseph encountered many other prisoners. Among them were the cupbearer and baker of Pharaoh. Joseph correctly how do you say that word? Thank you. Interpreted the dreams of these men, and the cupbearer was restored to his position while the baker was executed. Joseph asked the cupbearer to remember him before Pharaoh and asked for his release from prison. The cupbearer forgot about Joseph, and for 2 long years Joseph languished in prison. However, his faith remained strong, and eventually God would use Pharaoh's experiences in prison to bring Joseph to even greater prominence in Egypt. All right, we'll go ahead and go into a final word here. This account teaches us the providential power of God, no matter what unfair and cruel treatment we may experience. Because we examine these incidents through the clear vision of history, we know the end of the story. Remember that Joseph lived this without knowing the outcome. He walked by faith, and faith is confidence that God will be with us in an uncertain future. It was a tragedy when Joseph was sold into slavery. Out of that tragedy, Joseph rose to prominence in the house of Potiphar. Joseph was a slave, but his life was not in danger, and he was living reasonably well. Then another tragedy beyond his control came. Potiphar's wife lusted for him. Her lust ended with Joseph unjustly accused and imprisoned. Again, things looked bad for Joseph. Then a ray of hope came with the arrest of the cupbearer and baker. Once again, Joseph's hopes were dashed, and it must have seemed to him that he would live out his life in prison. This is a great illustration of most of our lives. We live from mountaintop to valley and repeat the process over and over again. In spite of triumph and tragedy, God is working out his master plan for his children. We do not know that plan, and neither did Joseph, but God did, and God's plan was certain to come to pass. When we are disappointed, we need to remember God is always with us and working for us. We are never alone, and we are never forsaken.
God has a path for us. We might not understand why things happen, but he does. But through it all, Joseph continued to serve the Lord and continued to trust the Lord, and God kept blessing him. He could have given up when he was in prison, but he didn't.
You know, a lot of us, even me, I'm guilty of when you get down that valley, you just kind of turn your back and it's like, wow. You question it, and we shouldn't question. Joseph here, he always kept his sight on God, and that's what got him back up. We need to keep our sights on God so we can be lifted back up and just trust in his word. I'll go ahead and go over the questions here if y'all want. We got a little bit of time, so first one here is how were Joseph's talents related to his troubles with Potiphar's wife? This one here I struggled with. I don't have a study guide for that part.
He was over the whole house, and she thought basically he belonged to her too. He told her that Potiphar had left everything in his control and didn't even know what he had. The only thing he said was he's not to touch his wife. So she kept after him. He kept rebuffing her.
See, that was the thing that confused me there, just because back then women were usually looked at as sort of like a piece of property. They were, you had to go to the father and sit there and you'd have to work off or something. We even talked about that a couple of chapters ago, how you'd have to end up working for the woman you wanted. And it was almost like it was a piece of property back then. So I didn't know how that would be viewed with the views back then of whether she would be in charge of the house or not. So I didn't know if she would be able to tell him what to do or not. So I was kind of confused on how that would be affected there.
She looked at him as a servant, and even though she was the woman of the house, still she was one of their servants, or he was one of their servants. So she felt as if he should obey her, because he was still a slave.
Yeah.
She was used to getting what she wanted.
Yeah.
All right. Second one. Why do you think Joseph did not yield to the advances of Potiphar's wife?
She didn't sin against God.
It was wicked. He said he didn't want to sin against God. Or Potiphar, for that matter.
Yeah, he also made a deal with Potiphar that he wouldn't. How did God protect Joseph in the prison?
He found favor with the prison guard. The prison guard put him in charge of everything.
So even in a bad situation, he still kind of had the better end of it.
Mm-hmm.
How can we overcome disappointments in our own lives?
Keep looking at God.
We keep our focus on the Lord and not our situation.
All right.
It's easy to get discouraged when you're down in the valley.
Mm-hmm.
But Mark Bishop's got that song, Changing Mountaintops.
Mm.
You know, just changing from one mountaintop to another, and you gotta go through the valley.
I'm gonna say you got to get.
Yeah.
There's a process to get to the other mountaintop.
We went out hunting before. Me and Neil were out, and it's a little bit of a struggle to get from the bottom of that hill to the top. But you know,
Especially when you're as out of shape as you are.
hey, I really messed up my ankle the Sunday before that, so it was kind of comical coming back off the hill too. But you know, he gets us to the top of that mountain. We just got to keep looking at the top, look at our destination, and keep looking up. So, alrighty, we'll go ahead and take a break and get back here in about 5 minutes.